What is your I've got to get the hell out of here right now story? Was sleeping at a friend's house. Went to the kitchen to get some water. Her father hugged me from behind. I was 14. I guess. When I was 15. I went to a friend's place. Her dad was smoking in the kitchen and when he saw his daughter brought friends over, he got excited and started flirting with a few of us. It was super skeezy. When I got home, I gave my dad a big hug and said, "I'm really happy you never hit on any of my friends." He was silent for a moment and looked a little confused. Then he finally said, "Way to have low standards there, sweetheart." I lived in South Everett, WA for a couple years. Was walking home from the bus stop to my apartment, which took me behind the Home Depot. Suddenly a van starts following me. I hear the side door slide open and look behind me to see a man with the top half of his body hanging out the slider door looking at me. I took off running towards my apartment. Literally running as far as I could. The van started going faster. By chance a guy was pulling out of the driveway of my apartment complex. Sees me running for my life. And stops. The van immediately turns around and speeds off. Guy asks if I'm okay. I ask him to just stay there and please watch me walk into my apartment, which was the building next to his. He did. Thank God. I started carrying mace and a very large knife the next day. A 500-pound hog got loose at the state fair and started charging right at me. I've never run so fast in my life. I was driving north on I-65 in the middle of Indiana. The sky was getting dark. The wind was picking up. It started hailing. I turned on the radio to hear that a tornado was nearby. I determined it was behind me going from SW to NE and about to cross over the interstate. Other cars were driving slow or pulling over because of the rain and hail. I was hauling ass to get away from there. Living in Baltimore some years back and I was driving home through a rough area of the city. Sitting at a stoplight behind an already stopped car. Another pulls up next to me on the right. Not really thinking anything of this. The light turns green. Neither of these cars move and I see a car zipping up behind me. I look to my left and I see two guys running towards me. I am so thankful that I left a good deal of space between me and the car in front. I hooked it around the car I front and sped off. Pretty sure I was going to be a victim of a carjacking or maybe something worse. Glad they ill-timed their plan and I gave myself that space. Lesson here is always keep your head on a swivel in Baltimore. Was waiting for the next bus in a bus station at 2 AM in Minneapolis. A security guard outside told me to stay within the camera zone. I sat down and waited. All alone except a couple of junkies in another part of the station. Suddenly a guy comes in and walks up to me. This guy dressed in a black hoodie wearing a skeleton mask stood right in front of me. Didn't say a word. Just stood there and looked at me. When he started to walk away I bolted out of there. Ran down the street and luckily found a 24-7 Walgreens. So you ran out of the camera zone? My friend and I met at Waffle House for lunch. A guy came into the restaurant looking for a piece of paper that he had accidentally left on a table. The waitress didn't know where the paper was located and might have thrown it away. The guy got upset saying the paper was important and he was going home to get his gun stored under his mattress. My friend and I quickly paid our check and got the heck out of the restaurant. Yep. That's Waffle House. I was solo camping in the woods during a phase where I wanted to be a survival expert. I hiked out. Miles from any roads or building. Built a shelter and then hiked back the way I came. Less than a mile away from my camp. I found a dead coyote. Decapitated. Gutted. And laid out like a sacrifice or something. The eyes were gouged out and it was strung across a big, flat rock. A rock which I used as a marker on the way in. So I know it hadn't been there a day before. I ran out of there as fast as I could. Knife at the ready. Probably 10 miles back to my house. I still have no idea who would have done it. But I know I didn't want to run into them in the woods alone. Sounds like that day you were a survival expert. I was the only white guy working at a Hispanic restaurant and I don't speak Spanish, that's part of it. One night after work I get invited to drink at one of their houses. All is going good with drinking and I even danced a bit. Then after going outside to the back patio to smoke a cigarette I come back inside and the guy whose house I was at has a knife and is yelling at these 3 co-workers of mine blocking the front door, yelling in Spanish that no one is leaving. I knew that much. A bar patron who knew me grabbed me and pleaded to the guy just to let me and him out since we had no part in it. The homeowner lets us both out. I ask the bar patron WTF was that when we're outside since I can't speak Spanish, and he says the guy thinks my 3 co-workers are sleeping with his wife and he's probably about to kill them. I got in my car and got the F out of there. I was in downtown Nick, a couple of blocks away from the WTC, gawking at a fire. There were tons of people milling around watching. They had blocked off some streets. And I asked a cop how I could get around to where I needed to go further downtown. He told me which streets were closed, but that they might expand it. So I should get moving. The conversation was pretty casual. As I started walking away I looked back. And he had his radio to his ear. And whatever he heard. He panicked. Went as white as a ghost. And started yelling for people to move further back. I turned around and jogged the hell out of there and made it to the Brooklyn Bridge before the first tower came down. I was on a restaurant and they were using a propane tank to power an outdoors heater. Suddenly the tank started to catch fire and I got out quickly because I thought it was going to explode. The staff turned the tank off and everyone laughed at me for overreacting, but damn, I got scared, lol. Oh. What a PSSY. I woke up one Friday in a hotel and the internet was down. I went to the hotel lobby to see what was up. And saw scenes of chaos on the TV. A crowd had started to gather to watch. Including the hotel staff. One employee told me the government had shut down the internet to test it. The scenes on the TV were of violent protests beginning all over Egypt as people made their first push to occupy Tahrir Square. It was the 25th of January. 2011 and I was in Benghazi, Libya, without my US passport. Needless to say, I spent my energy over the next few days trying to get out of the country. I was able to leave, but many of the people I was working with weren't as lucky. The revolution started in Benghazi less than 2 weeks later. It was surreal watching Anderson Cooper broadcasting live from the hotel I had just been staying in. My husband and I were heading out of town. We saw a guy on the side of the highway pacing, under the overpass. I asked my husband to take the exit and go over the overpass and take the next exit to continue on the highway. The second we took the exit, the guy jumped in front of a semi and killed himself. He was a freshman in college. The semi driver was 72 years old and 3 weeks away from retiring. I cannot imagine what the driver is going through. Man, it breaks my heart that people are in such a dark place that is the answer they find to their problems. Those types of suicides will with whoever accidentally killed the person for the rest of their life. My heart goes out to both the freshman and the semi driver. Semicolon. Edit. After reading a lot of these replies, it really is saddening to see the effects of these suicides. I'm tearing up at how quickly they are coming in. It seems like it's not even that rare. To anyone reading this who has entertained a thought like this, please seek help. I was living in France on my own and I got a tutoring client. A man wanted me to teach his young daughter. First session he offers to drive me home. Spends the entire time asking about a boyfriend, where I live, etc. Second session he wants to give me a tour of his house. I noticed he was standing in the door when we went into a room. Once we got to the second floor, I grabbed his daughter so nothing would happen. After that I tried to quit and he guilted me into coming 3 more times. Every time I got so anxious beforehand I wanted to puke. Every time he would offer a ride and I took the 2 hours of buses home instead. Finally I fully broke it off. I knew something bad was going to happen to me and confirmed it with a few other young English speaking women I knew. He was recruiting at best his second wife. But they all got extremely bad feelings being alone with him. Was 15-16ish. Drunk at a party. Half passed out on a couch with some dude pawing at me. I was conscious. But barely. And was too tired to make him stop until I heard him tell someone else help me get her to the other room. Could be he wanted to let me sleep it off in peace. But I doubt it. I forced myself awake. Found my, equally young and drunk, friend and made it out to the front yard where we were able to catch a ride home with somebody's older sibling. When I was in high school, early 80s, I saw a lot of heavy metal bands. I had a friend who could always get us backstage after the show. So Anvil played and we went backstage. All of a sudden the lead singer said, "Okay, all the girls take off your clothes or get out." I got out. The rest of the girls stayed. When I was 17 I met with a 23-year-old guy for a mall date. Can't remember his name for the life of me. I had just gotten out of a horrible relationship and was trying to distract myself. We had dinner and when the waiter brought the check, the guy told me he had forgotten his wallet in his car and that if I went with him he could grab it. I told him it was fine and paid for the meal myself. We went into a couple shops. But he kept asking me questions about my ex-boyfriend. Also he mentioned that he had been in jail but wouldn't tell me what for. And I was nervous. Then things came to a head when he kept saying, "Hey, just come to my car for a second please, let's listen to music," and kept getting increasingly anxious every time I declined. I was so scared. I immediately pretended to have a period emergency so I could get out of there, and luckily I had parked in a different lot than he did. I still have no idea what his intentions were, but man, that was terrifying. I was leaving for work at 5:30 am. While it was still dark, I locked the inside door handle and walked out the door, pulling the door closed behind me. As I turned around to walk off the porch toward my car, I saw 4 men jump out of a van and start coming toward me. The street was otherwise empty. My heart was pounding and I felt panic start as I was digging in my big, messy purse for my keys to unlock the door and get back in my house. The whole time, I'm just thinking they are going to grab me, shove me in the van, and kill me. I was able to get back in my house before they made it to me, but it scared the out of me. Turns out they were immigrations officers looking for someone who used to live in our house. And that is standard practice for them if they think the suspect will run. Bruh, what? Mine is more laughable and my dad likes to tell it, but it's the only thing that comes to mind. I was with my dad at a car shop his friend owned. He was visiting said friend and had just brought me along. They were working on some old car. And I wasn't paying much attention as an 8-year-old. But they sprayed something on a piece of the engine as they were turning it on or hitting the gas or something, and it made this big flame appear for just a second or two. Well, in that second or two I had ran several yards to the street because I had seen way too many movies of cars exploding. There were like 5 men including my dad all standing around and they were laughing their asses off. I was in Thailand back in 2010. On the southern islands after a full moon party. My friend and I were talking to 2 girls who invited us to play poker. We went and sat down with 2 German guys and 2 burly Thai guys full of tattoos and began to play. They were joking. Friendly. And the buy-in was $10. We lost some pots. Won some pots. Overall it was a happy experience. The Thai guys beat us and on the last hand I managed to claw my chips back to about $8. My friend was looking tired so I gave him the nod. I thanked for the game and I said we would cash out and we would be on our way. The Thai guys put a machete on the table and told us to off. My friend, myself and the 2 German guys noped out of that situation as fast as we could. On the way back the girls caught up with us and apologized. But it meant all because they were clearly in on the take. Lesson learned. If pretty girls ask you to play a game, it's for nefarious reasons. In high school I went to a party in a recently abandoned house on the outskirts of town. There were a lot of people I knew there but also a lot of shady folks I was unfamiliar with. Things started out okay, or at least as okay as they can for a party with a bunch of liquored up teenagers. As the night wore on people started destroying things. I guess just because the place was abandoned. I left when someone threw a toilet out of an upstairs window. I found out later that the cops showed up. Several people ran from them through a nearby cornfield but were caught. A friend of mine ran right into a barbed wire fence however and ended up in the hospital. Bad diesel fire at work. I saw the fireball billowing toward me so I jumped in a pit. The fireball blew over me. And when it retreated, I got the hell out of Dodge. I got some gnarly 3rd degree burns. But I survived. Edit. Whoa. Everyone. Thank you for your kind and humorous words. It was an oil refinery. BTW. WTF, do you work in Bowser's Castle? As a young teenager, maybe 13 YO, I was camping in the backcountry during a summer camp in the Midwest US. Second to last night of the trip we started seeing mammoth clouds and the sky turned green. But no immediate rain or hail. Being the good Midwestern kids we were, we knew the signs and found a semi-solid shelter before the storm hit. When we got out of the backcountry we found out that 3 major tornadoes had touched down and gotten as close as 1-2 km to our original campsite. Edit. I'm not American but I lived in the Midwest for 10 years when I was a kid. I moved away about 7 years ago. Hence the un-American terminology. As a New Yorker I would just stared at the pretty sky and probably die. Ripped my pants while bowling. Incidentally, I was also going commando. And the meats and cheeses were fully exposed. I bowled a frame or 2 before noticing too. Some dude in my uni class. Trying not to sound non-inclusive here but he was a special case. Kept talking about his ed-up life. Some things he'd done that made people fear him. Because he was unpredictable. Brought a knife into class. Placed it casually on the desk. One of those big off-Rambo ones. A girl in class was one of those mouthy types. Talked about him and he responded by getting her in a chokehold and threatened her. Smashed a pint glass over his head for no apparent reason. Other than to show that he could. Ended up in hospital. Everyone stayed the away from him. But only added to his paranoia. Everyone graduated and I stayed in that city for a bit. Bumped into him by accident in my gym. He told me I was one of the few who he didn't want to stab. Kept myself out of others' business. But he took it as a sign of friendship and wanted to follow me back to my apartment to hang out. Told him I was going to work after gym. Never went back to that gym ever again. I was in early high school and for an easy high school job I did some yard work for some of my neighbors. There was one older guy 2 doors down who asked me to pull weeds. Weed eat his backyard fence and push mow the yard. I finished this and was told to come back that evening so he could get cash to pay me. So far you may be wondering why I'm posting this here. But it gets weirder. I went over later and he had clearly been drinking. And I had to listen to him for 15 minutes while he looked for the cash he supposedly just got. Then he kept getting closer to me and he asked me to come down to his man cave to help set up his Wii and that he'd pay me a little more. I grabbed the cash and hightailed it out of there and never spoke to him again. My ex-husband came into our bedroom where I was sleeping and screamed into my ear. "You and your mom need to stop playing mind games with me." Understand I didn't speak to him much to not set him off. He hadn't spoke to my mom in 3 months. Without looking at him I walked downstairs in the dark to sleep on the couch. As I was laying down a big ceramic lamp flew by my head and smashed against the wall. He followed me downstairs and I didn't hear him because the dogs came with me and their collars jingled loud enough I couldn't hear him. He'd been abusive but after throwing a heavy lamp at my head in the dark I knew he'd kill me. I couldn't leave that night because he took my keys but I ran away to a safe house as soon as he left the house. Yes, I took the dogs. I've told this story before on a similar thread. My old boss grew up in a pretty shady part of town so he left as soon as he could but his younger brother Steve stayed and started hanging out with a really tight crowd. I'm at work talking about tattoos because my boss had a huge piece on his chest so he then tells me a story involving his brother. Steve was hanging with said Thai crowd at some Thai house. Drinking. Smoking and whatnot. Someone breaks out the meth. This is where starts getting weird. They're starting fights. hurling abuse at one another and just all round meth induced horrible behavior, which also included a homemade tattoo gun. Steve thought to himself, I have to get the out of here right now, but couldn't leave because he drove himself in but was pretty drunk and the house they were in was pretty isolated. That turned out to be a massive mistake because he passed out and the meth gang tattooed a swastika on his forehead. I had just got back from deployment and was doing drugs because I started having anxiety and was looking for a way to ease it. Ended up doing meth and liked it. About 2 weeks into my very first binge, I had gone to a trailer park and stayed there. I was coming down and I looked up and saw all the kinds of people that were at that house. They were all just nasty, unclean people who were obviously whacked out for days. I stood up, saw my future in every one of their eyes, and walked out and never touched it again. I was in Guadeloupe in the Caribbean. Some deranged mf had a rifle and was firing in the air above people's heads in an open market. Me and my buddy were the only white dudes there. I felt like we had a target on our backs. I have worked in various national parks and forests in my career and I've had a few close calls. When at Zion, I was assisting with a SAR op in the Narrows. We were already on borrowed time because we got word that a rancher had noted a downpour up canyon. The radio call was enough to pucker it up. But about 5 minutes later, I started seeing the water rise and could feel vibration under my feet. We got everyone on our team out to a high spot and a 7-foot wall of water caught up with us. Luckily, it passed quickly and fanned out nicely just downstream, but Jesus also got surrounded by a fire. Once, my lookout was clear of brush and pretty safe on its granite ridge. But when the wildlife starts making camp downstairs and they ask if you wanna hitch a ride with Heli, you say yes. Please. New Year's Eve party in high school. No adults and a bunch of rough-ish guys and one very petite young woman. She got a hold of a bottle that was basically half vodka and half orange juice and chugged it. I got the sense things may not end up well for her given some of the comments the guys were making, and these were not my friends. People I barely knew or trusted. I got her out of there and gave her a ride home. Feel like that could have ended up very bad if things had played out just a bit different. I was drinking at a bar in Abu Dhabi. I started dancing with this Iranian chick. Because why not? Her brothers approached me and were not happy with me doing this, and roughed me up a little bit to get payment. They let me go to the bathroom where I climbed out the window, wherein my drunken haze turned out to be on the 2nd floor. I proceeded to roll down the roof awning and fall into the pool of a posse swimming pool. Sure as hell fled while a bunch of amused tourists watched. I was once on what I thought was a closed municipal airport landing strip smoking the devil's lettuce. Long story short, it was in fact not closed. A word of advice: when trying not to get landed on by an airplane, go backwards not forwards. Press photographer showed up at a murder scene. Gang related. Before the cops got there because it was only 2 blocks from the office when I heard it on the scanner. Kid at the scene raised his shirt to show me his piece and told me I didn't belong there.